Welcome back, everybody, to Adventures with Michael and Julie. We have something special. Today we are diving into the master of horror himself, Stephen King, but not his novels this time. No, we're actually going to go into the darker corners of his writing, his short stories. Some of these have kept me up at night. Some of these are very short reads, but undeniably, this is Stephen King, arguably at his best. So without further ado, let's jump into my top 10 Stephen King short stories of all time. Kicking off the list at number 10 is The Mist. Now, technically, this is more of a novella, but it's too iconic to leave out. King traps us in a supermarket surrounded by thick, otherworldly mist filled by unspeakable horrors. But what's even more terrifying than the creatures is the breakdown of humanity within those walls. It's a brilliant study of fear, survival, and what people will do when pushed to their limits. It is intense, it is very atmospheric, and you feel extremely trapped, and the ending is tough. The ending is tough on this one. Number 10, The Mist. If you guys have not read The Mist, you are missing out on one of King's most creative short stories. Number 9, Children of the Corn. This story has left an indelible mark on pop culture, thanks in part to its unsettling concept, an isolated town ruled by children who have taken "thou shalt not suffer a witch to live" to a whole new level. The idea of kids turning against adults is creepy enough, but King adds his usual flair, making the rural setting and religious fanaticism deeply unsettling. Children of the Corn, the 80s movie. Ezekiel, this one was a good one. This one, for me, reading it, I was a child when I saw the movie. Reading it was much, much better. This one is not going to want to make you go to these little small towns on your road trip as you're passing through, especially in a cornfield at night. Trust me, this one is pretty unforgettable. And our Darkman returns in this one, for those of you who have seen the other Stephen King video. Coming in at number 8 is the lesser known but equally powerful In. This story is King at his psychological horror best. It deals with the concept of OCD and cosmic horror, blending the two in a way that makes you question reality itself. The protagonist's compulsive behaviors are more than just mental. They're a desperate attempt to keep an otherworldly evil at bay. Okay, In is not one of the popular Kings, not a traditional pick, but for me, this one was special. This one kind of gets into your brain, no spoilers, and it stays there for quite a while. This one will leave you thinking, and that one is why it has made it onto the list, In at number 8. This one also showcases how King can turn something very mundane into something really terrifying, and I love when King does that. At number 7, we have Graveyard Shift. This story plays on one of King's favorite themes, the horrors lurking in the everyday world. Here, a group of workers at a decrepit textile mill discover that their graveyard shift might be their last. It's a claustrophobic, creature feature type of horror with a deeply unsettling ending. Little trigger warning on this one: if you are afraid of rats, this might not be the best Stephen King story to read. Graveyard Shift, number 7. This one, again, very, very good movie adaptations, almost out of every one of these, but this one is going to be a pretty terrifying end if you're squeamish. Number 6 on my list is Sometimes They Come Back. King is a master at tapping into the fears of our youth, and this story is a chilling example. The protagonist, a high school teacher, is haunted by the ghost of his past, literally. What starts as a tragic memory turns into a nightmarish reality when the bullies from his childhood return from the dead. Creepy, nostalgic, undeniably Stephen King. That is why this one is on the list. Sometimes They Come Back. Again, one that I watched back in the 80s and then read later. Love this story. This is one of King's blendings that is so spectacular. Real trauma with supernatural. I love it when he does that. Number 6. Halfway through at number 5 is The Boogeyman. This one is classic King. A simple premise with a terrifying payoff. A man recounts to his psychiatrist the events that led to the deaths of his children, all of whom were taken by the boogeyman. But as the story unfolds, you start to realize that the real horror might be much closer to home. The Boogeyman, halfway through the list, a recent movie, have not seen that one, but the short story is extremely short. However, it's still King, everything is still there, and kind of makes you want to look or not look under your bed or in your closet. But again, we're taking real life events, true, what could be true in people's minds or their experience, and turning it into something that is terrifying. Number 4 is 1408, a story that turns a seemingly ordinary hotel room into a nightmare. The protagonist, a skeptical writer who debunks haunted houses, decides to spend the night in room 1408 at the Dolphin Hotel, a decision he quickly regrets. King builds tension masterfully, turning the room itself into a living, breathing entity that defies logic and reason. Of all of the short stories that have had film adaptations, 1408 might be my favorite. This one, again, truly spectacular. Love the actors that they used in the movie version. Love the story even more. This one is really claustrophobic. You are in a single environment that sounds very, very boring. You're in a hotel room. But again, it's King's masterful storytelling to be able to create the detail there, to have you in that hotel along with the main character. Number 4, 1408. I also think that this one is truly psychological horror. So again, King can go in a few different directions. This one is my favorite for the psychological suspense for sure. At number 3 is Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. Now, this might surprise some of you. After all, it's not your typical horror story. But it's undeniably one of King's best. This story, more than anything, is about hope. It's about the power of perseverance, even in the darkest of times. And, of course, it's beautifully written. Number three, maybe a lot of you do or don't know this, but The Shawshank Redemption, probably his most famous film to date, was actually Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption, written as the short story. And again, if out of all of these, if you've read or you've seen any of the adaptations, it's probably going to be this one. So I'll leave it here. You don't really need any introduction. Not a typical horror at all story from King, but again, it's his storytelling, it's his character development, and this one is superb. I also believe that out of all the emotions that King exhibits, this one is the one story that is about hope. And that, I think, for an avid King reader, is something that's a little bit new, if you will, to his writing style. So that's another reason why this one is number 3, and this one is special to me, Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. Number 2 is The Body, another story that leans more toward the dramatic than the horrific. But it's here for a reason. This story captures the essence of childhood friendships, the innocence of youth, and the moment when you realize that nothing will ever be the same. It's a story that's relatable, nostalgic, and ultimately bittersweet. Oh, we're down to number 2. This is tough. 2, though, has to be The Body. Again, film adaptation, Stand By Me. Saw it first, read this story later. And why is this one on the list? This one is not really about horror. This is all real life. But for me, again, the character development, being a child at the time that this movie came out, slightly younger than the group of kids that were in this movie, made me want to reread this when I found out it was an actual Stephen King story much later in life. And again, this one is about trauma. This one is more adventurous as well, and this one will set with you. I could reread this one many, many times over and have a different feel or have a different connection with the boys that are going through this ordeal. Nothing supernatural about it. However, it is special and it is on this list for a reason, because it is quintessential Stephen King and because the storytelling is so masterful. I had to put it in here. King doesn't just write about stories of horror, he writes about real life events, and this one is just that. There's no supernatural turn or element. It's just an excellent story. That's why it has to be at number 2, The Body. And finally, at number 1, we have Survivor Type. This story is King at his most brutal. It's about a surgeon who ends up stranded on a deserted island, and let's just say he'll do anything to survive. This is a story that's not for the faint of heart. It's gruesome, it's horrifying, and it's impossible to forget. King pushes the limits of horror here, asking the reader how far they would go to stay alive. Number 1, and this one has a personal connection, and maybe you won't have this if you go down and read these 10 stories, but for me, coming from the healthcare environment, Survivor Type has to be number 1. This is King at his most brutal. I have even seen older interviews with him that tell you, when they ask him, what is your favorite story that you have written to date? This one, as a short story, pops up on his top 5 because of the extremes, let's use that word, the extremes that he takes his writing to show you, to put you in that environment of what would you do if you were stranded on a desert island and you had no other resources available. And this one, this one has an ending that is something else. And for me, it has to be number 1 because you now have an amalgam of all of what is attractive about Stephen King and his writing style and his detail and his just ability, his excellent ability to put you in that spot and make you go through and read everything that character is going through. And so this one, again, not supernatural, but extremely brutal, extremely could possibly, potentially be real life, and putting you in that situation and making you ask that moral question of what would you do, where would you go, how would you handle something, again, this traumatic, this emergent. And so for number 1, the Survivor Type has to be on my top 10 list all time of Stephen King short stories. And there you have it, my friends, our top 10 Stephen King short stories. I need to know from you, what did I miss? I will be completely honest, I have not ran the full gambit of his short stories. These are just the ones that have lasting impact, memory, recall for me. Reading at a very young age his short stories up until now. Again, I get a little downhearted when I see that instead of a full novel, it's a book of short stories. This year was the same way. A book of short stories came out. But, hey, I read it. Each one has King's elements, obviously. He's written those. But these 10, for me, have had the longest lasting impact. We have been through the entirety of his writing style. We have chosen based on specific elements and specific environments and specific traumas, if you will, or events that have made each one of these stories the best. What I look for, just so you know, is could this have been a full-blown King 5, 6, 7, 1,000 page turner of a novel? So that's a little bit of the criteria that I like to have when I read his short stories, and that's another reason why I picked the 10 that I picked. But please let me know what I missed. Tell me to read or reread. Hopefully you're going to do the same thing after having been presented with this list. Tell me in the comments, and I will look into it or comment I have read it and tell you why it did not make the top 10 list. As always, thank you for joining, guys. We so much appreciate it. Happy spooky season. I'll see you again soon with another video.